Most people don't realize the moment it happens, the moment they stop questioning their life. It usually arrives quietly. No announcement, no alarm, no dramatic turning point. Just a slow acceptance. An alarm rings at 6:30 a.m. You open your eyes before it even sounds because your body already knows the routine. You sit up, check your phone, maybe scroll through messages or news. Then the same thoughts begin marching through your mind. Work, commute, meetings, emails, deadlines, bills. Another day begins. But something strange happens during moments like this. Sometimes, for a brief second, a question appears in the back of your mind. A small voice asking something uncomfortable. Is this really the life I'm supposed to live? And usually, that voice disappears quickly. Not because the question isn't important, but because the system around you is designed to make sure you never explore the answer. Welcome to this audiobook. This is Escape the Salary Matrix. Why Jobs Keep You Poor. And in this journey together, we're going to examine something most people sense but rarely understand. Why so many intelligent, hard-working people feel trapped in a cycle that never seems to lead to real freedom. Why salaries increase, but stress often increases with them. Why people earning more than their parents ever did sometimes feel more financially insecure than ever. And why the path most people are told to follow often leads somewhere very different from where they expected. Now, before we go further, let's clarify something. This audiobook is not here to attack work. Work can be meaningful. Work can be fulfilling. Work can build skills, character, and purpose. But there is a difference between working and being dependent on a system that quietly limits your freedom. Because once you see that system clearly, everything changes. You begin asking different questions, not, how do I get a better job? But, why does my financial life always seem to reset every month? Not, how do I get a raise? But, why do raises rarely lead to real wealth? Not, how do I survive the next decade? But, how do I escape this cycle entirely? This audiobook will walk you through that awakening. Not with unrealistic promises, not with overnight success fantasies, but with something far more powerful, awareness. Because awareness is the beginning of freedom. Throughout this journey, you will discover why the salary structure was never designed to make you wealthy, why lifestyle inflation quietly traps millions of professionals, why the difference between income and wealth is the most misunderstood concept in modern life, why discipline, assets, and ownership change everything, and how ordinary people can slowly shift their lives away from dependency toward independence. But before we explore how to escape the salary matrix, we must first understand something deeper. We must understand why the matrix exists at all, because systems don't appear by accident. They are built, maintained, protected, and once you see how the system operates, you begin to understand something powerful. You were never supposed to question it. You were only supposed to participate in it. And the moment you begin asking questions, you begin stepping outside it. But the real story begins much earlier than adulthood. It begins long before the first job, long before the first paycheck, long before the first promotion. It begins in school. Because the salary matrix doesn't start with employment. It starts with conditioning. And once you see how that conditioning works, you will never look at education, careers, or money the same way again. That realization is where our story truly begins. And it begins in the next chapter. Dear friend, you are definitely on the right track if you are watching this video. Like, subscribe, and write in the comments which topic or problem concerns you the most. Chapter 2. The conditioning begins before anyone ever signs an employment contract, before anyone ever receives their first paycheck. The foundation of the salary matrix has already been built. It starts in a place that most people consider harmless. School. Think about the structure for a moment. For the first 20 years of your life, you are trained to follow a very specific pattern. Wake up early, arrive on time, sit in rows, complete assignments, meet expectations, wait for evaluation, repeat. And when you succeed in this system, you are rewarded. Good grades, recognition, approval. But notice something subtle. The rewards rarely come from building something of your own. They come from meeting someone else's requirements. This is not an attack on education. Education can open doors. It can expose you to knowledge, ideas, and opportunities. But the structure itself quietly shapes the way you think about success. Success becomes associated with compliance. Follow instructions. Pass tests. Graduate. Then what? Then comes the next instruction. Get a job. Now pause here for a moment, because this transition is rarely questioned. For most people, it feels natural. You graduate. You start searching for employment. You hope to land something with stability, benefits, a predictable paycheck. And that's where the next layer of the matrix quietly appears. The salary promise. The promise that if you work hard enough, long enough, loyal enough, life will gradually improve. Promotions, raises, security, retirement. It sounds reasonable. In fact, it sounds responsible. And for many years, this promise worked fairly well. But the world has changed dramatically. Costs rise faster than wages. Opportunities shift. Technology transforms industries. And yet the mental framework people are taught about work remains almost identical to what it was decades ago, which creates a strange situation. Millions of people are following a blueprint designed for a world that no longer exists. Now let's talk about something rarely discussed: why the system prefers predictable workers. It's simple. Predictability creates stability. For organizations, for markets, for economic systems. A person who depends entirely on a paycheck behaves differently than someone who does not. A paycheck-dependent individual is less likely to take risks, less likely to question authority, less likely to leave, less likely to disrupt. From a system perspective, that stability is valuable. But from an individual perspective, that same stability can quietly become dependence, and dependence changes how people make decisions. Imagine this scenario. You're offered a promotion, more responsibility, more stress, but also a higher salary. At first, it feels like progress, and often it is, but something else happens simultaneously. Your lifestyle adjusts. A slightly nicer apartment, a newer car, more subscriptions, better vacations. None of these things are inherently wrong, but collectively, they create something powerful: obligations. And obligations change the psychology of work. Because once your financial life requires a certain level of income, leaving that income becomes frightening. Suddenly, your job is no longer just a job. It becomes a necessity, and necessity removes options. This is how the salary matrix quietly tightens, not through force, but through gradual adaptation. Your income rises, your expenses rise, your responsibilities rise, but your freedom often stays exactly the same, or sometimes it decreases, because the more obligations you carry, the harder it becomes to step away. That realization can be uncomfortable, but awareness is powerful because once you recognize the pattern, you can begin asking new questions. What if income alone is not the real path to financial independence? What if the true difference between freedom and dependence is not salary size, but income structure? Because there are two completely different ways money can enter your life. The first is the one most people know. You trade time for money. Work hours, receive pay, stop working, income stops. Simple. But there is another model entirely, a model where income continues even when you are not actively working, a model built around assets, systems, and ownership. Most people never explore that second model, not because it is impossible, but because the first model consumes so much time and energy that few people step back to question it. Yet the people who eventually escape the salary matrix all discover the same truth. Income from labor creates survival. Income from assets creates freedom. But understanding that difference requires breaking through one more powerful illusion. An illusion that convinces millions of people they are financially successful, even while they remain trapped inside the system. And that illusion is what we will explore next. Because the salary matrix does not trap people with discomfort. It traps them with comfort, just enough comfort to keep them from asking the most important question of all. Is this actually freedom or just a comfortable cage? That question opens the door to Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The comfortable cage, the most effective prison ever created, does not look like a prison. There are no walls, no guards, no locked doors. From the outside, it looks like success. A stable job, a steady paycheck, a comfortable apartment, maybe a new car parked outside. Everything appears normal, even impressive. And that is exactly why the system works so well, because the salary matrix does not trap people with suffering. It traps them with comfort, just enough comfort to stop them from asking dangerous questions. Think about it. You're not starving. You're not homeless. Your life may even look good on social media. But if you pause for a moment and ask a deeper question, something unsettling appears. Are you actually getting ahead, or are you simply maintaining the illusion of progress? Many professionals experience this realization slowly, year after year. Their salary increases, their lifestyle improves, yet their financial stress remains exactly the same. How can that be? The answer lies in a psychological mechanism economists call lifestyle inflation. But most people experience it without ever noticing. Let's imagine someone named Daniel. Daniel graduates from university and lands his first job. He earns $50,000 a year. At first, the salary feels incredible. More money than he has ever earned before. He moves into a modest apartment, buys a used car, starts building a life. Then a few years pass. Daniel earns a promotion. Now he makes $70,000. It feels like a huge step forward. So he upgrades, a nicer apartment, a newer car, better furniture, more travel. Nothing extreme, just improvements. Then another promotion. Now Daniel earns $95,000. And once again, life adjusts. Better neighborhood, higher rent, higher expenses, a more expensive lifestyle. And before Daniel realizes it, something strange has happened. Despite earning almost twice as much as he did in his early 20s, he still feels financially tight, still waiting for the next paycheck, still feeling pressure, still thinking, once I make a little more money, things will finally relax. But the relaxation never arrives, because The system quietly adapts. Every salary increase expands expectations. Every promotion expands obligations. And the gap between income and expenses remains small. This is why people earning six figures often feel just as financially stressed as those earning far less. Because income alone does not create freedom. The gap between income and expenses does. And the salary matrix quietly encourages that gap to remain narrow. The more you earn, the more society encourages you to spend. A better house, a better car, better everything. It feels like success, but financially, it often creates something else. Dependence. Dependence on the next paycheck. Dependence on the next promotion. Dependence on staying inside the system. Now pause and consider something powerful. What would happen if your paycheck disappeared tomorrow? Be honest with yourself. How long could you maintain your current life? 1 month, 3 months, 6 months? For millions of professionals, the answer is uncomfortable. Less than 90 days, despite years of working hard, despite earning respectable salaries, despite appearing financially successful. They are still one disruption away from crisis. This is what makes the salary matrix so effective. It provides just enough comfort to keep people moving, but rarely enough freedom to step away. And once people accept that rhythm is normal, they stop searching for alternatives. But something interesting happens when someone finally sees the pattern. Once awareness appears, the illusion begins to break. They start noticing things they never questioned before. Why does money arrive in large amounts but disappear in small ones? Why do promotions bring relief instead of freedom? Why does financial progress feel temporary? And eventually, a more powerful question emerges. What if the goal was never supposed to be a bigger salary? What if the real goal is something entirely different? What if the path to freedom is not climbing the salary ladder, but stepping outside it? That realization can be unsettling because it forces you to confront something difficult. The possibility that the life you've been building may not actually lead where you hoped. But it also opens something powerful. Possibility. Because the moment you understand the system, you can begin designing a different relationship with money. Not one built entirely on labor, but one built on ownership. And ownership changes everything. Because people who escape the salary matrix eventually discover a simple truth. You can work for money, or you can build things that generate money. One path requires constant effort. The other creates leverage. And the difference between those two paths is what separates dependence from freedom. But before we explore how ownership works, we must confront another uncomfortable reality. Because the salary matrix does not just control money. It quietly shapes how people think about risk, ambition, and possibility. And that mental barrier might be the strongest part of the system. We explore that barrier next. Because escaping the matrix does not begin with money. It begins with mindset. And once that mindset shifts, the entire world begins to look different. Dear viewer, share your success story, even if it is small. It can motivate other people to visit the comment section and read it, and it can inspire them. Also, don't be shy about asking questions, and perhaps someone with more experience, or someone who has been through this, will share the answer. Remember, it is only through communication that people become stronger and better. Thank you. Chapter 4. The Psychology of the Paycheck. The salary matrix does not begin with numbers. It begins with psychology. Because money is not just a tool. Money is emotion, security, fear, status, identity. And once money becomes tied to identity, something powerful happens. People stop making the financial decisions logically. They begin making them emotionally. This is where the salary matrix becomes incredibly effective, because the system does not need to force anyone to stay inside it. Human psychology does most of the work. Let's explore one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms behind the paycheck: security bias. Most people believe a salary equals safety. A steady paycheck feels predictable, comforting, reassuring. You know roughly how much money will arrive each month. You know your bills can be paid. You know life will continue. But here is the uncomfortable truth. A salary is not real security. A salary is temporary permission to earn money. And that permission belongs to someone else. Your employer, your company, your organization. The moment that permission disappears, so does your income. Think about that carefully. A person with a high salary but no savings, no assets, and no investments is still financially fragile. Their income depends entirely on a single relationship. If that relationship ends, the financial structure collapses. Now compare that to someone with assets, investments, businesses, royalties, rental income, digital products, multiple streams of value. Even if one source disappears, others continue. One system stops, others keep working. That difference is the difference between income and independence. But the salary matrix rarely teaches this distinction. Instead, it encourages people to pursue one metric above all others: bigger salaries, better titles, higher positions, climbing the ladder. But ladders have a hidden rule. You can only move up one step at a time, and someone else always controls the ladder. Your promotion, your raise, your position, all depend on decisions made by people above you. That structure limits how quickly your financial life can change, no matter how talented you are, no matter how hard you work. Your progress follows the pace of the ladder. But the most financially free individuals rarely climb ladders. They build systems, and systems behave differently. A system can scale. A ladder cannot. A ladder supports one person at a time. A system can support thousands. Imagine the difference between two scenarios. In the first, someone works 40 hours a week for a salary. If they stop working, income stops. In the second, someone builds a digital product that sells online, or an investment portfolio that produces dividends, or a business that operates with a team. The effort may start the same, but the long-term result is completely different, because systems continue working after the initial effort. This is called leverage, and leverage is one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern life. Leverage allows one action to produce many results. One product sold thousands of times. One video watched by millions. One investment growing for decades. The salary matrix limits leverage because it ties income directly to time. Work more hours, earn more money. But time is limited. There are only 24 hours in a day, which means salary growth eventually reaches a ceiling. Systems, however, do not have the same limitation. They scale, they expand, they multiply, and once someone understands this difference, their thinking begins to change. They stop asking, "How can I work harder?" and start asking, "How can I build something that works even when I'm not working?" That question is powerful. But it also creates fear, because building systems requires uncertainty, experiments, failures, learning new skills. And uncertainty scares people who rely entirely on paychecks. Which brings us to another psychological force inside the salary matrix: risk avoidance. When your entire financial life depends on one income source, risk becomes terrifying. You avoid it, you delay it, you convince yourself you will take action later, maybe next year, maybe when I save more money, maybe when things feel more stable. But stability inside the salary matrix can be deceptive because the system feels safe until it suddenly isn't. Companies restructure, industries change, technology replaces jobs, economic downturns appear without warning, and suddenly the safety people depended on disappears. Which is why the real path to security often looks different. It involves building options. Options to leave a job, options to start something new, options to survive without panic. And options are created through one simple mechanism: assets. Assets are systems that produce value. Businesses, investments, intellectual property, platforms, ownership. Assets create leverage. Leverage creates freedom. But building assets requires a different way of thinking about time, because the salary matrix trains people to think in weeks. Next, paycheck. Next bill. Next vacation. But asset builders think in years, 5 years, 10 years, decades. They invest time today to create systems that will pay them long after the work is done. That shift in perspective is one of the most important transformations anyone can experience. But before someone can make that shift, they must confront another uncomfortable truth. The salary matrix does not just exist in the economy. It exists inside people's identities. Many individuals define themselves by their job titles, their position, their salary, and escaping the matrix often requires letting go of that identity, which can feel terrifying because when identity changes, life changes. And that is exactly where the next chapter begins. Because escaping the salary matrix is not just a financial decision, it is a psychological transformation. And it begins the moment someone stops asking, "What do I do for a living?" and starts asking, "What am I building for my future?" Dear viewers, please write in the comments what assets you buy or are interested in. Perhaps these are stocks, or maybe cryptocurrency. It is interesting to see how you structure your investment portfolio. Also, please write what you think about real estate. Is it still relevant to buy flats today? Chapter 5. The Identity of the Worker. There is a moment in many people's lives when a simple question creates unexpected silence. It usually happens in social situations. Someone new meets you. They smile politely. Then they ask the most common question in modern society. "So, what do you do?" And almost automatically, you respond with your job title. "I'm an engineer. I work in marketing. I'm a manager. I'm a consultant." The conversation moves on, but something subtle has just happened. Your identity has been compressed into a role, a position, a function within a system. And most people accept this identity without ever questioning it, because the salary matrix does not only shape how people earn money, it shapes how people see themselves. Think about it. From the moment someone begins a career, they are often measured by external indicators: their title, their company, their salary, their promotions, and slowly, these markers become part of their sense of self. Someone becomes proud of being a senior analyst, or a director, or a vice president. And there is nothing wrong with taking pride in hard work. But problems appear when identity becomes locked to the structure of employment. Because if your identity depends entirely on your job, your freedom depends on it too. Now, imagine what happens when that identity is challenged. A layoff, a company closure, a sudden industry shift. For many people, the emotional impact goes far beyond finances. It feels personal because losing a job can feel like losing a part of who you are. But here is the truth that many people only discover later in life. Your job is not your identity. Your job is a role you perform. And roles can change. But identity is something deeper. Identity is the collection of skills, ideas, and abilities you carry regardless of where you work. The salary matrix quietly encourages people to forget that difference. Because when someone believes their identity depends on their job, they become easier to control. They become afraid to challenge authority, afraid to leave, afraid to experiment, afraid to build something new. Fear becomes a silent anchor. Now contrast that with someone whose identity is built differently. Instead of saying, "I am my job," they say, "I am a builder, I am a creator, I am someone who produces value." This subtle difference changes everything because builders do not rely on a single system. They build many. A builder might still work a job, but they also learn skills, create projects, invest in ideas, explore opportunities. Their identity is not tied to a title. It is tied to growth. And growth cannot be taken away by an employer. Once someone adopts that mindset, something remarkable happens. They stop seeing their job as their entire financial life. They begin seeing it as one component of a larger strategy, a resource, a temporary platform, a tool to fund something bigger. This shift in identity is often the first real step toward escaping the salary matrix, because the system only works if people believe it is their only option. The moment someone believes there are alternatives, the system loses power. Now here's where things become interesting, because once identity shifts from worker to builder, a new set of questions begins to appear. Questions like, what skills could I develop that create value outside my job? What could I build that belongs entirely to me? What problems exist in the world that I could help solve? What assets could I begin creating today? These questions open doors that most people never notice, and the modern world has made those doors easier to access than ever before. A generation ago, building something outside employment required enormous resources. Factories, large capital, physical distribution. Today, the landscape looks very different. The internet allows a single individual to reach millions. Digital platforms allow creators to build audiences. Software allows small teams to create global products. And knowledge travels faster than at any point in human history, which means something remarkable. The barriers to building assets have never been lower, yet the salary matrix remains strong. Why? Because habits are powerful, conditioning is powerful, and comfort can be even more powerful. Most people stay inside the system not because they cannot leave, but because leaving requires uncertainty, and uncertainty feels uncomfortable. But here is a powerful truth. Every person who eventually escapes the salary matrix experiences the same realization. They stop seeing uncertainty as danger. They begin seeing it as opportunity. And that shift changes everything, because uncertainty is where innovation happens. It is where businesses begin, where investments grow, where new systems emerge. Security may keep you safe, but uncertainty is where freedom is built. Now imagine something for a moment. Imagine a life where your financial stability does not depend on one company, Imagine multiple streams of value entering your life. Investments, projects, assets, ideas that grow over time. Suddenly, your relationship with work changes. You're no longer trapped. You have options, and options are the true definition of freedom. But the path toward building options requires understanding something most people misunderstand. It requires understanding the difference between income and wealth. Because many people spend their lives chasing income, while the truly free quietly focus on building wealth. And those two things are not the same. That difference is where our story continues next. Because once you see the difference clearly, you begin realizing why so many high earners still feel financially stuck, and why the people who escape the salary matrix often follow an entirely different strategy. Chapter 6. Income versus Wealth. There is one misunderstanding that traps millions of intelligent people inside the salary matrix, a misunderstanding so common that it feels normal. It is the belief that high income equals financial success. At first glance, the logic seems obvious. If you earn more money, you should become wealthier, right? But look around carefully. You will notice something surprising. Many people earning six figures still feel financially trapped. They still depend completely on their next paycheck. They still worry about bills, layoffs, and unexpected expenses. Why? Because income and wealth are not the same thing. Income is money that flows in. Wealth is money that stays. Income is temporary. Wealth is durable. Income stops when work stops. Wealth continues working even when you don't. This difference is the hidden line separating financial stress from financial freedom. And the salary matrix quietly encourages people to focus on the wrong side of that line. Think about how success is usually measured in the modern world. What salary do you make? What was your raise this year? How much is your bonus? But rarely do people ask a far more powerful question. How many assets do you own? Assets behave differently than income. Assets generate value repeatedly. Stocks produce dividends. Businesses produce profits. Real estate produces rent. Intellectual property produces royalties. Digital products produce ongoing sales. Assets do not depend on hourly labor. They depend on systems. And systems scale. This is why two individuals earning the same salary can end up living completely different financial lives. Imagine two professionals. Both earn $120,000 a year. The first person spends nearly everything they earn. Nice apartment, nice car, frequent travel, upgraded lifestyle. They look successful. But after 10 years, their bank account remains fragile. Their wealth has not grown. They simply maintained a comfortable lifestyle. Now imagine the second person. They also earn $120,000. But they treat their salary differently. Instead of seeing income as money to consume, they see it as fuel for building assets. They invest regularly. They build side projects. They acquire ownership. Over time, those assets begin producing income of their own. 10 years later, something remarkable happens. Their salary is no longer their only financial support. Their investments produce income. Their projects generate revenue. Their assets work quietly in the background. Suddenly, the relationship between work and money changes. Work becomes optional. This is the moment someone begins stepping outside the salary matrix, because the matrix relies on a single rule: dependence on earned income. Break that dependence, and the structure begins to lose control. Now here is where the conversation often becomes uncomfortable. because building assets requires patience, and patience is rare in a culture obsessed with immediate results. People want wealth quickly. They want success now. But wealth built through assets grows slowly at first. Investments compound gradually. Projects take time to gain traction. Businesses require experimentation. The early stages can feel frustrating. But something powerful happens over time. Momentum builds. Income from assets begins small, but it grows. And eventually, those streams combine. One investment becomes two. Two become five. Five become 10. The system expands, and slowly the balance of power shifts. Your job is no longer your financial lifeline. It becomes one income stream among many. Now imagine the psychological difference. When your salary is your only income source, every decision feels risky. You cannot afford mistakes. You cannot afford uncertainty. But when you have multiple streams of income, something changes. Fear begins to fade. You gain options, options to negotiate, options to leave, options to pursue, opportunities others cannot. This is the true power of wealth, not luxury, not status, but freedom of choice. Freedom to decide how your time is spent. Freedom to choose work that feels meaningful. Freedom to walk away from environments that drain your energy. And ironically, this freedom often leads people to produce even more value. Because when fear disappears, creativity expands. Now here is the deeper truth. The salary matrix survives because most people never cross the bridge between income and wealth. They remain focused on increasing income. But they never build systems that turn income into assets. And without assets, financial independence remains impossible. But once someone understands this distinction, everything begins to change. They stop chasing raises. They start building ownership. They stop asking how much they earn. They start asking what they own, because ownership is the real engine behind wealth. And once someone begins focusing on ownership, the path out of the salary matrix becomes visible. But ownership introduces another powerful concept, one that most people never fully understand: leverage. Leverage is the ability to produce results far beyond the effort you personally apply. And it is the force that allows a single individual to build extraordinary wealth over time. Without leverage, income remains limited. With leverage, possibilities expand. That is where our journey continues next. Because the people who escape the salary matrix all eventually discover the same secret. They stop selling time and start building leverage. Friend, write your opinion on this topic in the comments. Do you agree with us or not? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Chapter 7. The Power of Leverage. There is a hidden rule that separates people who remain inside the salary matrix from those who quietly step outside it. The rule is simple. Wealth grows through leverage, but most people spend their entire lives operating without it. To understand leverage, imagine two different ways of earning money. In the first scenario, you trade your time for income. You work 8 hours. You get paid for 8 hours. The moment you stop working, the income stops. This is the model most jobs follow. It is direct, predictable, and limited, because time is limited. No matter how talented you are, no matter how disciplined you become, you cannot expand a day beyond 24 hours. Now imagine a different model. You spend time building something once, and that thing continues producing value repeatedly. A book that sells for years, an investment portfolio that compounds, a digital product downloaded thousands of times. A business that serves customers while you sleep. That is leverage. Leverage allows one effort to create many outcomes. It multiplies your impact. And once you begin looking for leverage, you start noticing something fascinating. Nearly every wealthy individual in history has relied on it. Authors leverage books. Investors leverage capital. Entrepreneurs leverage systems and teams. Creators leverage media platforms. Technology founders leverage software that can serve millions of users simultaneously. The principle remains the same. Build once, benefit repeatedly. This is what the salary matrix quietly prevents, because the structure of employment ties income directly to hours worked. The more hours you work, the more money you earn. But the system rarely allows income to grow exponentially. It grows incrementally, raise by raise, promotion by promotion, step by step. Leverage behaves differently. Instead of climbing a ladder, leverage builds a platform. A platform expands outward, and the more value you build on that platform, the more people it can reach. Consider something that would have been impossible a generation ago. A single creator uploads a video online. Millions of people watch it. Revenue appears from advertising, partnerships, or products. One piece of work reaches an audience larger than most television shows in the past. This is leverage created by technology. But leverage does not belong only to internet creators. Investors use it too. Imagine investing money into businesses that grow over decades. You do not personally run the company. You do not personally manage every operation. Yet, as the business expands, your ownership grows in value. This is financial leverage. Now imagine combining multiple forms of leverage: media, technology, capital, networks. This is how extraordinary wealth is built. But here is the truth most people miss. Leverage requires something the salary matrix discourages: ownership. If you do not own the system, you cannot benefit from its growth. You can contribute effort. You can earn a salary, but the long-term rewards belong to the owners. Ownership is the difference between participating in a system and benefiting from its expansion. This is why entrepreneurs pursue equity, why investors purchase shares, why creators build audiences they control. Ownership transforms work into an asset. Without ownership, your effort remains temporary. With ownership, your effort becomes permanent. Now pause and consider something powerful. What would happen if you slowly began building leverage in your life? Not quitting your job tomorrow, not taking reckless risks, but gradually building systems that create value outside your salary, investing consistently, learning new skills, creating projects, exploring ideas that could scale. At first, nothing dramatic would change. The salary would still support your life. But something subtle would begin happening. Your dependence on that salary would slowly decrease, because small streams of leverage would begin appearing: an investment here, a project there, a system slowly expanding. Over time, those streams could become rivers, and eventually the river of income from your assets might equal or even exceed the income from your job. That moment is powerful, because that is when the salary matrix begins losing its grip. Not through rebellion, not through anger, but through independence. The system cannot control someone who no longer depends on it. But before anyone reaches that point, they must overcome a major obstacle, an obstacle more powerful than lack of money, more powerful than lack of opportunity, more powerful than lack of knowledge. The obstacle is comfort, because comfort convinces people to stay exactly where they are. Comfort whispers that the current system is good enough. Comfort delays action. Comfort postpones ambition. And the salary matrix depends on that comfort. So the next chapter asks an uncomfortable question. What if comfort is not safety, but the quiet force keeping you trapped? Because once someone understands the danger of comfort, they begin seeking something far more valuable: freedom. And the path toward freedom begins by challenging the routines most people never question. That journey begins in Chapter 8. Chapter 8, The Comfort Illusion. Comfort is one of the most dangerous forces in modern life. Not because comfort is bad. Rest is good. Safety is good. Stability is good. But comfort can slowly become something else, a trap that feels like security. And the salary matrix understands this better than most people realize, because the system does not need to control you through fear. Fear causes rebellion. Fear makes people question authority. Fear pushes people to escape. Comfort does the opposite. Comfort keeps people still. Comfort whispers, "You're doing fine. Things could be worse. Don't risk what you already have." And those words are powerful because they sound reasonable, but they also quietly postpone growth. Now, imagine two people. Both wake up early. Both commute to work. Both perform their responsibilities well. But their internal conversations are very different. The first person thinks, "This job is stable. I'm lucky to have it. I should focus on doing it well." And again, there is nothing wrong with dedication. But if that mindset becomes permanent, something subtle happens. Their entire future becomes tied to the system they work inside. Their income, their identity, their schedule, their opportunities all depend on the same structure. Now imagine the second person. They still perform their job well. They still respect their responsibilities. But their internal dialogue sounds different. "This job supports me for now, but it cannot be my entire future." So after work, they study, they build, they invest, they experiment. They learn skills the job never required, not because they hate their job, but because they understand something powerful. Comfort today can quietly destroy freedom tomorrow, and the difference between those two people will not appear immediately. For years, their lives may look identical, same income, same routine, same daily rhythm, but 5 years later, the difference begins to show. The first person remains exactly where they started, still dependent on the same salary, still hoping for the next promotion, still measuring progress through small incremental raises. The second person has built something new, maybe a side project, maybe investments that have grown, maybe a small business, maybe a digital asset producing income. Nothing dramatic at first, but something important has changed. Their financial life is no longer controlled by a single system. Options are beginning to appear, and options create power. Because the moment you have options, you can negotiate, you can choose, you can walk away. The salary matrix loses influence over someone who has options. But the system understands this, which is why comfort is so carefully maintained. You are given just enough reward to stay motivated, just enough stability to avoid panic, just enough lifestyle improvement to feel like progress, but rarely enough freedom to step outside the structure. Think about how society measures success. Promotions, raises, new cars, bigger houses, luxury vacations. These symbols create the image of progress. But symbols are not freedom. You can live in a beautiful home and still be financially trapped. You can drive an expensive car and still depend entirely on your next paycheck. You can earn a six-figure salary and still have no assets. The difference between appearance and reality is enormous, and the salary matrix thrives on that confusion. Because when people chase appearances, they rarely build independence. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself something honestly. If your salary stopped tomorrow, how long could you live the same life? 1 month? 3 months? A year? For most people, the answer is uncomfortable, which reveals an important truth. What feels like stability is often simply temporary permission to earn. Real stability looks different. Real stability means your life can continue even when circumstances change. It means having assets, savings, systems, options, and those things are built deliberately. They do not appear automatically. They require awareness, discipline, patience. But once someone begins building them, a fascinating psychological shift occurs. Fear begins to shrink, because dependence begins to shrink. And as dependence fades, confidence grows. Now, imagine waking up knowing your financial life does not depend entirely on one company, one boss, one system. Imagine having multiple sources of income, multiple opportunities, multiple paths forward. That is when the salary matrix begins losing its grip, not through rebellion, but through independence. And independence starts with one small but powerful decision, the decision to stop spending every dollar you earn. Because the next trap inside the salary matrix is not income, it is consumption. And understanding consumption may be the single most important step toward escaping the system entirely. Because money that is consumed disappears, but money that is invested becomes a worker. And workers build wealth. That is where the next chapter begins. Because once you understand the difference between consumption and ownership, you begin seeing the entire financial world differently. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Chapter 9. The Consumption Engine. There is a machine inside the salary matrix that works silently. You don't see it. You rarely question it. But it operates every single day. That machine is consumption. The system functions best when money moves quickly, when income enters your life and leaves just as quickly. This isn't a conspiracy. It's simply the structure of a modern economy. Businesses survive when people spend. Markets grow when consumption increases. Entire industries exist to encourage you to buy more. But for an individual trying to build freedom, this creates a conflict. Because every dollar you spend is a dollar that cannot build an asset. Every dollar consumed disappears. Every dollar invested becomes a potential worker. And this difference determines whether someone remains inside the salary matrix or slowly steps outside it. Let's explore something powerful that economists often describe: the difference between producers and consumers. Most people spend their lives primarily as consumers. They produce value through their job, but then that money flows outward immediately. Housing, transportation, food, subscriptions, entertainment, convenience. There is nothing inherently wrong with these expenses. Life requires spending. But when consumption expands to match income, wealth becomes impossible. This is one of the quiet mechanisms that keeps the salary matrix functioning. Your income rises, your lifestyle rises, your obligations rise, but your wealth stays the same. And because those obligations must be paid every month, your dependence on the next paycheck increases. This is exactly what the system needs: predictable consumers, predictable workers, predictable financial behavior. Now think about the psychological side of consumption. Why do people buy things they don't actually need? Often, it has nothing to do with the item itself. It has to do with identity, status, comparison. Humans naturally compare themselves with others. This behavior has existed for centuries, but the modern world has amplified it dramatically. Today, you don't compare yourself to a few neighbors. You compare yourself to thousands of people online. People with luxury lifestyles, perfect vacations, expensive clothes, beautiful homes. And even if you consciously know these images are curated, your subconscious still absorbs the comparison. This creates pressure. Pressure to appear successful. Pressure to upgrade your life. Pressure to keep up. And the phrase keeping up with the Joneses has evolved into something far larger. Now people are keeping up with millions of strangers on social media. The result is predictable. People spend more, not because they need to, but because they feel they should. And this behavior quietly fuels the consumption engine of the salary matrix. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The system does not care if you build wealth. It only requires that you continue participating, continue earning, continue spending, continue repeating the cycle. Now pause for a moment and imagine something different. Imagine someone who intentionally breaks that cycle. They earn money, but instead of increasing their lifestyle immediately, they redirect part of that income into assets, investments, businesses, ownership. At first, their lifestyle might look modest, perhaps even behind their peers, but something powerful is happening behind the scenes. Their money is not disappearing. It is multiplying. And over time, that multiplication becomes extraordinary. Because assets grow, they compound, they produce income, which can then be reinvested into more assets. This is how wealth quietly accumulates, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through consistent decisions. The decision to buy assets instead of liabilities. The decision to invest instead of impress. The decision to think long-term instead of chasing short-term pleasure. And once someone adopts that mindset, the entire salary matrix begins to look different, because suddenly the system's incentives are obvious. It wants you to spend, but wealth requires restraint. It wants you to upgrade constantly, but freedom requires patience. It wants you to remain dependent on income, but independence requires building assets. Now, here's something important. Escaping the salary matrix does not require living like a minimalist monk. It doesn't require eliminating joy or avoiding every luxury. Life should be enjoyed. But enjoyment becomes far more powerful when it is supported by assets rather than debt. The goal is balance. Consume consciously. Invest consistently. Build ownership deliberately. And over time, that balance begins shifting the entire trajectory of your financial life. But before anyone can truly break free from the consumption engine, they must confront something deeper. Because consumption is not just a financial habit, it is a psychological one. And breaking psychological habits requires awareness. Awareness of where your money actually goes. Awareness of what drives your spending decisions. Awareness of the invisible forces shaping your behavior. In fact, one of the most powerful exercises anyone can perform is surprisingly simple. Track every dollar, not to punish yourself, not to feel guilt, but to see clearly, because clarity creates control, and control creates freedom. But awareness alone is not enough, because once you see the consumption engine clearly, You must replace it with something else. A new system, a new pattern, a new financial structure built around growth instead of depletion. And that structure begins with something most people underestimate: a single principle. Live below your means. This idea sounds simple, almost boring, but in reality, it is one of the most powerful financial strategies ever discovered, because the gap between what you earn and what you spend is the space where freedom begins. And the next chapter will explore exactly why that gap is the doorway out of the salary matrix. Because without it, escape is impossible. But with it, everything changes. Please like and subscribe if you want a better future. A better future for your children, your family, and yourself. It's very difficult to achieve success today, but I'm sure you'll succeed. All you have to do is learn and discover new things. Chapter 10. The Freedom Gap. There is one number that quietly determines whether someone remains trapped inside the salary matrix or slowly begins escaping it. Not their salary, not their job title, not their industry. The number is far simpler. It is the gap between what you earn and what you spend. That gap may look small, almost insignificant at first, a few $100s, maybe 1,000. But that gap is the birthplace of financial freedom, because without it, there is nothing left to build with. If every dollar that enters your life immediately leaves, there is no room for assets to grow, no room for investments, no room for opportunity, only survival. This is why two people earning the same income can experience completely different financial futures. One spends everything they earn. The other protects the gap. The first person appears wealthier, better lifestyle, better car, better vacations, but their financial future remains fragile. The second person may look more modest at first, but behind the scenes, something powerful is happening. Their money is being deployed, invested, converted into assets, and those assets begin building momentum. Now here is something interesting. The salary matrix quietly discourages people from protecting this gap, because protecting the gap requires discipline, and discipline often looks boring compared to consumption. Imagine a professional earning $80,000 per year. If they spend all of it, they remain dependent on the system forever. But if they consistently invest even 20%, $16,000 per year begins building assets. Over 10 years, that becomes $160,000 invested. But when those investments compound, the number becomes far larger. The true power of the gap appears through time. Time multiplies disciplined behavior, and over years, those small gaps create enormous differences. Now imagine the psychological effect of having a financial buffer. Savings that cover several months of living expenses. Investments that generate income. Suddenly, your relationship with work changes. You are no longer desperate. You are no longer forced to accept every condition. You have space. You have breathing room. And that breathing room changes how you think, because fear fades. You can negotiate. You can take calculated risks. You can explore opportunities others cannot. This is why financial independence often begins long before someone fully escapes the salary matrix. It begins the moment they create financial margin. Margin creates flexibility. Flexibility creates confidence. Confidence creates action. And action builds new systems. Now let's pause for a moment and reflect. Why do so many people struggle to maintain this gap? The answer lies in human psychology. Short-term rewards are incredibly powerful. Buying something new feels good immediately. Saving or investing often feels invisible. The benefits appear later, much later, and human brains are wired to prioritize immediate satisfaction. This tendency is known as present bias. We favor pleasure today, even if it harms our future. The salary matrix relies heavily on this bias, because if everyone prioritized long-term wealth building, the system would begin losing control. Fewer people would depend on paychecks. More people would build assets. More people would gain independence. So the environment around you constantly reinforces the opposite behavior. Advertising encourages spending. Social media encourages comparison. Consumer culture encourages upgrades. All of it pushes you toward the same outcome. Spend now, worry later. But those who escape the matrix learn to reverse this pattern. They delay gratification. They protect the gap. They treat their salary not as spending money, but as fuel for asset creation. This mindset shift is powerful because suddenly the paycheck becomes a tool, not a lifeline. The job becomes a resource, not a prison. And slowly, step by step, a new structure begins forming, a structure where income feeds investments. Investments create assets. Assets produce new income. Income feeds more investments. A self-reinforcing cycle begins. This is the opposite of the salary matrix. Instead of working endlessly to maintain consumption, you build systems that reduce dependence on work. But here is something important. This transformation does not happen overnight. It requires patience, consistency, and most importantly, clarity. You must know exactly where your money is going, exactly how much you are saving, exactly how much you are investing. Because without clarity, the gap disappears. Expenses creep upward. Consumption expands. And the salary matrix quietly regains control. Which brings us to a critical realization. Financial freedom does not begin with complicated strategies. It begins with awareness. Awareness of your spending, awareness of your habits, awareness of your relationship with money. And once awareness appears, control becomes possible. But awareness alone is not enough, because the next step after protecting the gap is far more powerful. You must decide where the gap goes, because money sitting idle slowly loses value. But money invested wisely begins multiplying. This is where the real transformation begins. The shift from earning money to making money work for you. And once that shift begins, the salary matrix slowly starts losing its grip. But the next chapter introduces something even more powerful than the gap. Something that can accelerate financial freedom dramatically. A force that turns small investments into life-changing wealth. That force is called compounding. And once you understand how compounding works, you will begin seeing time in a completely different way, because time is not your enemy. When used correctly, time becomes your greatest financial ally. That discovery begins in Chapter 11. Chapter 11. The Silent Multiplier. There is a force in the financial world so powerful, yet so quiet, that most people never notice it until it is too late. It does not shout. It does not rush. It does not demand attention. But over time, it transforms small beginnings into extraordinary outcomes. That force is compounding, and understanding compounding may be the single most important step toward escaping the salary matrix. Because the salary system operates linearly. You work 1 hour. You get paid for 1 hour. You work 40 hours. You get paid for 40 hours. More effort equals more income. It is simple, predictable, and limited, but compounding operates differently. Compounding multiplies results over time. Instead of adding income, it builds upon previous growth. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine someone invests $10,000. If that investment grows by 10% in 1 year, it becomes $11,000. Now, something interesting happens. In the second year, the growth is no longer calculated on the original $10,000. It is calculated on $11,000. Another 10% growth produces $12,100. In the third year, growth applies to $12,100, then $13,310, then $14,641, and the pattern continues. At first, the increases feel small, almost unnoticeable, but over time, the growth accelerates because each year builds upon the previous year. This is the magic of compounding, growth generating more growth. But here is where things become truly powerful. Compounding does not only apply to money, it applies to skills, it applies to knowledge, it applies to networks. Every hour you invest in learning compounds into future opportunities. Every skill you develop compounds into future income. Every connection you build compounds into future possibilities. The salary matrix rarely emphasizes this long-term perspective because the system focuses on short-term productivity, weekly deadlines, monthly performance reviews, quarterly targets. But compounding requires something the salary matrix rarely rewards: patience. The early stages of compounding look unimpressive. An investment portfolio may grow slowly for years. A business may struggle to gain traction. A side project may take time before anyone notices it. During this phase, many people give up. They assume the effort is not worth it. They return to the comfort of predictable income. But those who persist eventually reach a turning point. The moment when compounding becomes visible. And once that moment arrives, the results accelerate dramatically. Think about planting a tree. In the first year, it grows slowly. In the second year, the change is still small. But after a decade, the tree becomes something entirely different. Large, stable, producing fruit. Compounding follows the same pattern. Slow beginnings, invisible progress, then exponential growth. But here is something most people misunderstand. The real power of compounding comes from time. The earlier you start, the stronger the effect becomes. A person who begins investing at 25 often builds far more wealth than someone who begins at 40, even if the second person invests larger amounts. Why? Because the first person allowed time to do the heavy lifting. This is why the salary matrix can be so dangerous. It encourages people to delay investing, delay asset building, delay financial education. Focus on your career first. Start investing later. Wait until you earn more. But time lost cannot be recovered. Every year spent without compounding is a year that future wealth cannot grow. Now imagine two individuals. One waits until age 40 to start investing seriously. The other begins at 25 with small amounts. Even if the second person stops investing after 10 years, their early investments may continue compounding for decades, eventually surpassing the late starter's contributions. This is the quiet advantage of time. But compounding requires one more ingredient: consistency. Not perfection, not genius. Consistency. Small investments made regularly, skills practiced daily, ideas tested repeatedly. Consistency transforms small actions into enormous results. And this is why escaping the salary matrix does not require dramatic leaps. It requires consistent steps. Saving consistently, investing consistently, learning consistently, building consistently. These habits compound just like money does. And over time, the difference becomes extraordinary. Because while most people spend decades relying entirely on income, those who understand compounding build systems that grow independently of their labor. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The assets you built begin producing income of their own. That income gets reinvested, which produces more income, which produces more assets. And suddenly, your financial life begins expanding faster than your effort alone could ever achieve. This is the moment when money truly begins working for you. But compounding alone does not guarantee freedom, because the salary matrix has one final mechanism that keeps people trapped, a mechanism far more powerful than low income, far more powerful than lack of opportunity. That mechanism is debt. Debt can silently reverse the effects of compounding. Instead of wealth growing over time, interest payments slowly drain it away. And for millions of people, debt becomes the invisible chain that keeps them locked inside the salary matrix. Understanding that chain is the next step in breaking it. Because once you see how debt interacts with the system, you begin realizing why so many hard-working individuals remain financially stuck for decades. And once you understand that dynamic, you can begin designing a strategy that moves you in the opposite direction, toward freedom, toward ownership, toward independence. That journey continues in the next chapter, because the next barrier between you and financial freedom is one of the most misunderstood forces in modern life, debt. And once you understand how it really works, you will never look at borrowing money the same way again. Chapter 12. The invisible chains of debt. Debt is one of the most powerful forces inside the salary matrix. Not because debt is inherently evil, but because of how it changes behavior. Debt changes how you think. Debt changes how you make decisions. Debt changes how much risk you can tolerate. And most importantly, debt changes how free you are to choose your life. Let's start with something most people never realize. Debt is the reverse of compounding. Earlier, we explored how investments compound in your favor. Money grows. Returns generate more returns. Time multiplies wealth. Debt does the opposite. Debt compounds against you. Interest accumulates. Balances grow. Payments extend into the future, and slowly your income becomes tied to obligations that must be paid. Now imagine how this interacts with the salary matrix. If you have student loans, car payments, credit cards, and a mortgage, your monthly expenses increase dramatically. And once those obligations exist, something powerful happens. Your freedom shrinks. Because suddenly, your life requires a certain level of income just to remain stable. This is where the phrase golden handcuffs begins to make sense. Golden because the lifestyle may look impressive. Handcuffs because leaving the system becomes difficult. Imagine someone earning $120,000 per year. They have a beautiful home, a luxury car, private school for their children, an impressive lifestyle. But behind the scenes, their monthly obligations are enormous. Mortgage payments, car payments, insurance, loans, subscriptions. And despite the high income, almost every dollar is already committed. So what happens if they begin feeling unhappy at work? What happens if they want to change careers? What happens if they want to start a business? The answer is often the same. They can't. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack ideas, but because their lifestyle requires the paycheck. This is why debt can quietly reinforce the salary matrix. It turns income into a necessity rather than a tool. And when income becomes a necessity, risk becomes dangerous. Entrepreneurship becomes unlikely. Innovation becomes postponed. Dreams become delayed. But here is something important to understand. Not all debt is equal. There is a difference between destructive debt and strategic debt. Destructive debt consumes your future income. Credit cards used for consumption. Loans used for depreciating assets. Payments made for things that lose value over time. These debts drain wealth. Strategic debt can sometimes be used to build assets. Loans used to acquire income-producing property. Capital used to build businesses. Investments designed to generate more value than the cost of borrowing. But even strategic debt requires discipline, because leverage amplifies both success and failure. The salary matrix thrives when individuals accumulate destructive debt, because the more obligations you carry, the harder it becomes to step outside the system. Now, imagine the opposite approach. Imagine someone who intentionally reduces debt. They pay down obligations. They avoid unnecessary loans. They simplify their financial life. Suddenly, their monthly expenses decrease, and when expenses decrease, the gap we discussed earlier expands. That gap creates power, because power in finance comes from flexibility. Flexibility allows you to take risks. Flexibility allows you to explore opportunities. Flexibility allows you to say no when something does not align with your values. And the fewer financial chains you carry, the easier it becomes to move. Now pause for a moment and consider a simple question. If you had no debt, no car payments, no credit card balances, and 6 months of savings, how differently would you view your job? Would you feel trapped? Or would you feel confident? Would you feel pressured to tolerate things you dislike? Or would you feel free to walk away? This is why escaping the salary matrix is not just about earning more. It is about reducing dependence, reducing expenses, reducing obligations, reducing vulnerability. Because the less you owe, the more control you regain. And control is the foundation of freedom. But eliminating destructive debt is only the first step. Because once the chains begin disappearing, you must replace them with something stronger. Assets, systems, ownership. These are the structures that create lasting independence. But before someone begins building those systems, they must confront one more powerful force, a force that silently shapes financial decisions for millions of people. That force is fear. Fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, fear of stepping outside the familiar path, and the salary matrix depends heavily on that fear, because fear keeps people inside predictable systems. But once someone learns to manage fear, they begin exploring possibilities they once avoided. And that exploration is where the real journey begins. Because escaping the salary matrix is not just about money. It is about courage. The courage to build something new. The courage to question assumptions. The courage to design a life that belongs to you. That transformation begins in the next chapter. Dear viewer, please write in the comments what interested you most in the video. This will help us improve our videos. Chapter 13, Fear, the silent guardian of the system. There is a gatekeeper standing between most people and financial freedom. It does not carry weapons. It does not enforce laws. Yet it stops millions of people from ever attempting to escape the salary matrix. That gatekeeper is fear. Fear of losing stability. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of stepping into uncertainty. And the salary matrix quietly relies on this fear to maintain control. Because fear keeps people inside predictable systems. Think about the moment someone begins questioning their career path. Maybe they start feeling restless. Maybe they sense they could build something of their own. Maybe they imagine starting a business, launching a project, or investing more seriously. But almost immediately, fear appears. What if it fails? What if I lose money? What if I regret leaving stability? These questions feel rational, but fear rarely asks balanced questions. Fear exaggerates risk. Fear magnifies worst-case scenarios. Fear convinces you that staying where you are is the safest choice. Yet history tells a different story. Every innovation, every successful company, every transformative idea began with uncertainty. No one launches a new venture with guarantees. No one builds something meaningful without risk. But the difference between those who succeed and those who remain stuck is not courage alone. It is risk management. Escaping the salary matrix does not require reckless decisions. It requires calculated steps, testing ideas, building skills, creating income streams gradually. This is why many people who achieve financial independence do not quit their jobs immediately. Instead, they use their jobs as a foundation, a resource, a source of capital, while quietly building assets on the side. Over time, those assets grow stronger than the salary itself. And eventually, the relationship between job and income begins to reverse. Instead of depending on the job becomes optional. But this process requires patience, because fear loves immediacy. Fear tells you that if something cannot work instantly, it must be impossible. Yet the most powerful transformations often occur slowly. Let's imagine someone named Maya. Maya works in a corporate environment. Stable salary, predictable routine, but deep down, she wants more control over her life. So she begins exploring opportunities outside her job. At first, the progress is tiny. She studies investing, learns about digital businesses, experiments with ideas. Nothing dramatic happens for months, maybe even years. But something subtle begins changing. Her knowledge grows, her network expands, her confidence increases. Eventually, she launches a small online project. It generates a few $100s. Not life-changing, but real. That small result changes something inside her. The fear begins shrinking, because now she has evidence that alternative paths exist. She continues building. Her project grows. Her investments grow. And slowly, the financial pressure of relying on one income source begins fading. This is how most people escape the salary matrix, not with dramatic leaps, but through incremental courage, small actions repeated consistently, each action weakening fear, each result strengthening belief. But here is the interesting part. The moment someone realizes they can create value outside the salary system, their perspective changes forever, because they begin seeing opportunities everywhere. Problems that could be solved, markets that need solutions, ideas that could become businesses, skills that could create income streams, and suddenly the world looks very different. Instead of a rigid system with limited options, it becomes an environment full of possibilities. But fear does not disappear completely. Even experienced entrepreneurs feel uncertainty. Even successful investors face risk. The difference is not the absence of fear. The difference is action despite fear. They understand that growth lives on the other side of uncertainty. And once someone crosses that psychological threshold, the salary matrix begins losing its influence because control over your life no longer feels impossible. It feels achievable. But courage alone is not enough because escaping the system also requires direction, a strategy, a roadmap. And that roadmap begins with one critical principle. You must stop trading time alone for money and start building systems that generate value repeatedly. This idea sounds simple, but understanding it deeply can change the trajectory of your life because systems scale, time does not. And the next chapter explores exactly how individuals begin building those systems. The shift from labor to leverage, the shift from employment to ownership, and the shift from survival to independence. Because once systems begin working for you, the salary matrix can no longer hold you inside it. Chapter 14. From labor to systems. Most people spend their lives improving one thing, their ability to work harder. They become more efficient, more skilled, more productive, and while these improvements can increase income, they rarely change the fundamental structure of the salary matrix, because the matrix still depends on one rule: your time equals your money. And no matter how valuable your time becomes, it remains limited. You cannot duplicate it. You cannot scale it. You cannot sell the same hour twice. This is why the transition from labor to systems is so important. Systems are structures that produce value continuously. They do not depend entirely on your daily effort. Once built, they continue operating, sometimes quietly, sometimes powerfully, but always independently of the hours you personally work. Now imagine the difference between two people. The first person is extremely talented. They work 80 hours a week. Their income is high. But if they stop working for a month, their income stops too. The second person works hard as well, but they focus on building systems. Maybe they create digital products. Maybe they invest in businesses. Maybe they build an online platform that attracts an audience. Their effort creates something that can continue generating value long after the initial work is finished. The difference between these two lives is enormous. One depends on constant effort. The other benefits from accumulated systems. And the fascinating part is this: most systems begin incredibly small: a simple investment account, a small online store, a content platform, a software tool, a niche service business. In the beginning, the results may feel insignificant, but systems compound, just like investments. Each improvement strengthens the structure. Each customer adds momentum. Each new asset expands the network. Over time, these systems become powerful engines of value. Now let's talk about an idea that often surprises people. The most financially independent individuals rarely rely on one system. They build many. One stream of income might come from investments, another from a business, another from intellectual property, another from partnerships. Each system supports the others. And when multiple systems operate simultaneously, something remarkable happens. Income becomes resilient. If one system slows down, others continue producing value. If one opportunity disappears, another emerges. This is the opposite of the salary matrix. Inside the matrix, your financial life depends on one channel: your paycheck. Outside the matrix, income becomes diversified, flexible, expandable. Now here is the key insight. Building systems does not require abandoning your job immediately. In fact, many of the most successful system builders began while still employed. Their job provided stability, but their free time built freedom. Evenings became learning time, weekends became creation time. Ideas turned into experiments, experiments turned into systems. Over time, those systems began producing results, sometimes slowly, sometimes unpredictably, but eventually, consistently. And when consistency appears, something powerful happens psychologically. Confidence grows because you no longer rely entirely on someone else's structure. You begin trusting your own ability to create value. That confidence is transformative. It allows you to take smarter risks, explore new opportunities, negotiate better terms, and most importantly, it gives you the option to design your life intentionally. But there is something important to remember. Systems must create value. Without value, systems collapse. This is why the most successful businesses and investments all share a common principle. They solve problems. They improve lives. They provide something people genuinely want. Value is the foundation of sustainable systems, and the greater the value you create, the more powerful your systems can become. Now imagine the world through this lens. Every inconvenience becomes an opportunity. Every inefficiency becomes a potential solution. Every unmet need becomes a possible system. This perspective transforms how you see the economy. Instead of being a passive participant, you become an active creator. And creators have far more influence over their financial future than employees alone. But before someone can fully step into that role, they must overcome one final illusion, an illusion that quietly shapes how people think about work, an illusion that convinces people their time must always belong to someone else. That illusion is called the career ladder. And once you understand how the ladder works, you begin realizing why so many people climb for decades without ever reaching real freedom. The truth about the ladder awaits in the next chapter, because sometimes the path to independence is not climbing higher, but stepping onto an entirely different structure. Chapter 15. The Ladder, Illusion. For generations, society has presented one path as the definition of success. Climb the ladder, start at the bottom, work hard, gain experience, earn promotions, move upward. The ladder seems logical. Every step promises progress. Every promotion feels like advancement. Every raise feels like proof that the system works. And for a long time, this structure made sense. Climbing higher meant better income. Better income meant better security. But there is a hidden limitation built into the ladder. A ladder only allows one direction, upward, but slowly. And every step requires permission. Your boss approves the promotion. Your company determines the raise. Your industry sets the ceiling. No matter how talented you are, the ladder moves at the pace of the system controlling it. Now imagine spending 20 years climbing, long hours, sacrificed weekends, missed moments with family, finally reaching the top tier of your career. You have the title, you have the salary, you have the recognition. But something unexpected happens. You realize you still cannot stop working because your lifestyle depends on the ladder. Your mortgage, your obligations, your expenses, all tied to that position. And suddenly, the ladder feels less like a path to freedom and more like a structure you cannot step away from. This is the ladder illusion. It promises independence through promotion, but often delivers dependence through income. Now contrast the latter with something different, a platform. A platform does not move upward step by step. It expands outward. Instead of climbing higher within someone else's system, you build something that can grow on its own. A platform might be a business, an audience, an investment portfolio, a piece of intellectual property, a digital product, a network. The more value you add to the platform, the more it expands. And expansion does not require permission. It requires creativity, persistence, and ownership. This is why many people who escape the salary matrix shift their focus away from ladders toward platforms. They stop asking, "How can I get promoted?" and start asking, "What can I build that grows beyond my time?" That question changes everything, because once you begin building platforms, your effort compounds differently. Instead of earning incremental raises, your systems begin expanding, and expansion can produce results that traditional career paths rarely offer. But here is something important. Platforms do not replace work, they transform it. Building something meaningful requires effort, discipline, learning, failure. But the nature of that effort changes. Instead of trading time directly for money, you invest time into creating value that continues working long after you stop. Now, imagine the difference 10 years later. One person climbed the ladder diligently. They reached a senior position. Their salary is high, but their schedule is full. Their stress is constant. Their income still depends on remaining in that role. The other person built platforms, small at first, side projects, investments, ideas tested slowly over time. But those platforms expanded. Customers appeared, assets grew, and eventually those systems began producing income independently. Suddenly, their time belongs to them again, not because they stopped working, but because they now control how they work. This is the real difference between the ladder and the platform. The ladder gives you higher income. The platform gives you leverage, and leverage creates freedom. But before someone begins building platforms seriously, they must confront another powerful illusion, an illusion that keeps many people climbing ladders far longer than they should, the illusion of retirement. For decades, society has promised a simple equation: work hard for 40 years, then finally live freely. But what if that equation is flawed? What if waiting until the end of life to experience freedom is the greatest trap of the salary matrix? That uncomfortable question leads us to the next chapter. Because understanding retirement may completely change how you view time, work, and wealth. And once you see the reality clearly, you may begin designing a life where freedom does not wait until the final chapter. Chapter 16. The retirement myth. For most of modern history, people have been told the same story. Work hard for 40 years, save what you can, retire at 65, then finally enjoy life. It sounds reasonable, responsible even. But there is something deeply flawed about this model, because it assumes something dangerous. It assumes you must postpone freedom until the final chapter of your life. Think about what this really means. You trade your best years for income, your 20s building experience, your 30s building a career, your 40s managing responsibilities, your 50s maintaining stability. Then finally, after decades of routine, you are told that life can begin. But by that point, something else has changed. Your energy, your time with loved ones, your health, your curiosity. The years when adventure feels effortless are often already gone. Now, this does not mean retirement is meaningless. financial security later in life is extremely important. But the real question is deeper. Why must freedom wait until the end? Why is the system designed so that independence only appears after decades of dependence? The answer lies inside the salary matrix itself. Because the matrix works best when people commit their entire working lives to it. If everyone pursued independence early, the system would struggle to maintain its structure. But there is another way to think about work, a model that has quietly gained popularity in recent years. Instead of waiting for retirement, people design periods of independence throughout life, sometimes called mini-retirements, sometimes called lifestyle freedom, sometimes simply called financial flexibility. The idea is simple. Instead of working non-stop for 40 years, you build systems that allow periods of freedom earlier. You might work intensely for several years, build assets, create savings, then step away temporarily, travel, learn, explore new ideas, then return to work with renewed perspective. This cycle creates a very different relationship with time. Work becomes something you choose, not something you endure until the finish line. But for this model to work, one condition must exist: assets. Assets that produce income, savings that create security, systems that continue operating while you step away. And this brings us back to the central theme of escaping the salary matrix: ownership. Because ownership allows your past effort to continue rewarding you in the future. Without ownership, every dollar must be earned again. With ownership, your previous work continues generating value. Now imagine two individuals again. The first person follows the traditional path. They work steadily for 40 years. Their income rises gradually. Their lifestyle rises alongside it. By retirement, they finally accumulate enough savings to stop working. The second person builds assets earlier. They invest aggressively. They build systems. They focus on ownership rather than consumption. After 15 years, their assets produce significant income. They may still choose to work. But now, work is optional. This difference is profound, because freedom earlier in life changes everything. It changes how you approach relationships, how you pursue creative ideas, how you explore the world, how you define success. But escaping the retirement myth requires courage, because it challenges the path society expects you to follow, and anytime someone steps outside expectations, there will be skepticism. Friends may question your choices. Family may worry about stability. Colleagues may misunderstand your priorities. But every individual who escapes the salary matrix eventually accepts something important. Living intentionally often looks unusual to those living automatically, and that is perfectly fine, because freedom rarely comes from following the crowd. It comes from designing a path aligned with your values. Now here is a critical point. Escaping the salary matrix does not mean rejecting work. Work can be meaningful, creative, rewarding. The real goal is not to eliminate work, but to eliminate compulsory work, the kind of work you must perform simply to survive. Once survival is secured through assets and systems, work becomes something entirely different, a form of expression, contribution, growth. And when work becomes voluntary rather than mandatory, life begins to feel completely different. But there is still one final challenge remaining. Even when someone understands the system, even when they understand assets, leverage, and ownership, many people still hesitate to begin, because starting requires confronting something uncomfortable: the truth about time. Time is the one resource every human shares equally. 24 hours per day, no more, no less. And how those hours are used ultimately determines whether someone remains inside the salary matrix or slowly begins building the life they truly want. That realization brings us to the next chapter, because escaping the matrix begins with a simple but powerful shift: the way you spend your time. Dear viewer, since you watched this video to the end, you are among the small percentage of people who can appreciate our videos. Please write your rating in the comments, whether you like the video or even what you would improve. We read every comment under our videos, so yours will not go unread. Thank you. Chapter 17. Time is the real currency. There is a lie so deeply embedded in modern culture that 10 years later, that version of you wakes up in a different reality. Their assets produce income. Their investments have grown. Their time belongs to them again. Work becomes optional, not because they stopped contributing value, but because they now control how they contribute, and that control changes everything. Now imagine the other path. 10 years of repeating the same routine, chasing promotions, increasing income, increasing expenses, remaining dependent on the next paycheck. Which version of your future feels closer to the life you want? Because the truth is simple. Freedom is not found. Freedom is built. And it is built through awareness. Awareness of how the system works, awareness of how money flows, awareness of how time is spent. Once awareness appears, action becomes possible. And action changes everything. Before we close this audiobook, I want to leave you with one final thought. A thought that may stay with you long after these words fade. The salary matrix is powerful, but it is not permanent. It exists because people participate in it. But the moment someone chooses to build something beyond it, a new path appears. And every person who builds that path makes it easier for others to follow. So the question is not whether the system exists. The question is much simpler. What will you build next? If this audiobook made you think differently about work, money, or freedom, take a moment and reflect on it. What idea changed your perspective the most? Share it. Because sometimes the simple act of expressing a new idea is the first step toward changing your life. And if you want the next audiobook to explore another powerful subject, whether it's building assets, mastering financial discipline, creating digital leverage, or designing a life of intentional freedom, tell me. Because every journey toward independence begins with one moment of awareness. And that moment might have started today. Remember this: you can spend your life climbing a ladder built by someone else, or you can spend your life building platforms that belong to you. Choose carefully. Your future is built one decision at a time.